The challenge that shook the world. It was a hot afternoon in Los Angeles in the early 1970s when two of the biggest names in martial arts and boxing met by chance backstage at a sporting event. Muhammad Ali, the undefeated heavyweight champion known for his sharp tongue and unwavering confidence, was surrounded by reporters and admirers. Bruce Lee, the master of Jeet Kune Do, observed everything with his penetrating gaze, his muscles defined under his tight shirt, his body always ready for action. Ali, never a man to back down from provocation, looked at Bruce with a defiant smile. "Hey, little dragon," he said, using the nickname the newspapers had given Lee, "I hear you're fast. But can you hit me?" The surrounding crowd laughed, expecting another one of his jokes. But Bruce didn't smile. He just tilted his head, as if weighing every word. "Do you want me to hit you?" Bruce asked, his voice calm, almost soft. "Okay. But don't say I didn't warn you." Ali, confident, spread his arms in a theatrical gesture. "Come on then. Hit me as hard as you can. Let's see if that movie punch of yours is for real." Bruce didn't hesitate. In a movement so quick that few around could follow, he positioned himself, swiveled his hip, and threw a punch straight at Ali's solar plexus. It was not a savage blow, but a display of absolute precision, the weight of his entire body concentrated on a single point, the energy flowing like a wave. The impact was dry, almost silent. Ali didn't fall, but his eyes widened. For a second, he seemed to freeze, his breath catching in his chest. Then, slowly, he bent forward, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. The surrounding reporters were silent in disbelief. The man who had withstood boxing's most brutal knockouts, who had faced giants like Sonny Liston and George Foreman, was there, momentarily out of breath, because of a single punch from Bruce Lee. When he finally straightened up, Ali was still trying to hide his shock. "Damn," he murmured, rubbing his chest. That wasn't fair." Bruce smiled, but there was no arrogance in his gesture. "It wasn't a hard punch," he said. "It was a good punch." Ali, despite the discomfort, couldn't contain a laugh. Okay, you win this one. But next time, I'll choose distance." And with that, the two men shook hands, each acknowledging the other's skill without the need for words. There has never been a challenge like that again. But the story spread, whispered among fighters and fans alike, a reminder that sometimes true mastery lies not in the size of the blow but in the precision with which it is delivered. And that day, Bruce Lee had proven that, even in the face of the greatest champion in the world, a single move could change everything. The legacy of the right punch. Years passed, and the legend of the duel between Ali and Bruce grew like an uncontrollable flame. But it wasn't all whispers of admiration. Behind the scenes in the fighting world, some did not accept Ali's humility in the face of what they considered to be just a film martial artist. Joe Frazier, still smarting from his loss to Ali at Thrilla in Manila, was one of the first to speak out. "A right punch? A lucky break," that is, Frazier snarled in an interview, eyes narrowed beneath thick eyebrows. If he had faced a real heavyweight in a real ring, he wouldn't be out there bragging. Bruce, who at the time was already facing health problems, heard the words and just shook his head. Not out of fear, but out of knowing that some wounds never heal. Even so, the provocation echoed. Other fighters, young and hungry for fame, began to publicly challenge Bruce, demanding proof that his style, Jeet Kune Do, worked against bigger opponents. The most persistent was a promising light heavyweight named Derek the Hammer Vaughn, a kickboxer with an impeccable record and a fiery temper. Vaughn not only challenged Bruce to a fight, but also ridiculed him on TV shows, calling him a master of choreography and an old man who only knows how to beat up kung fu actors. If he's that good, let him prove it in the octagon. Or does he only know how to throw punches in slow motion? The pressure increased. Bruce, now 32 and feeling the first signs of the kidney failure that would soon take him, knew he couldn't ignore the challenge. Not out of pride, but because he understood that if he refused, his legacy would be tarnished forever. And most importantly, he believed in what he taught. Jeet Kune Do was not just a martial art, it was a philosophy of adaptation, of brutal efficiency. The fight was scheduled for Las Vegas, in a closed event, without cameras, with just a handful of journalists and invited fighters. Vaughn arrived confidently, sporting defined muscles and a sneer. Bruce, in turn, entered the octagon with the same calm as always, his eyes focused, his body light. The fight started with Vaughn attacking in waves, high kicks and wide punches, trying to impose his size and strength. Bruce dodged with minimal movements, dodging blows with subtle hip turns, counterattacking with surgical precision. For every blow Vaughn delivered, Bruce responded with two, one to the body, one to the head, always at the exact moment when the opponent was vulnerable. In the second round, Vaughn was already breathing hard. His face was swollen, and a cut above his eyebrow was bleeding. Bruce, on the other hand, barely looked sweaty. Then, in a moment of carelessness from the hammer, Bruce advanced with a perfect sequence, a low kick to unbalance, followed by a direct punch to the solar plexus that made Vaughn double over like an empty sack. Before he could recover, a right hook caught him in the jaw, knocking him onto his back. The octagon shook with the impact. Vaughn tried to stand up, but his legs wouldn't respond. The referee started counting, but after 3 seconds, he raised his hand in a sign of giving up. Silence. Bruce helped Vaughn to his feet, holding him by the arm. The defeated fighter spat out his mouthguard, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and respect. How did you do that?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Bruce smiled, the same arrogance-free smile from years ago. "You fought with strength. I fought with intelligence." Vaughn didn't respond. He just nodded, as if he finally understood something the numbers on his cartel had never taught him. Over the next few months, Bruce continued training, but his health deteriorated. He knew that time was short, but that didn't stop him from recording his last teachings, from writing about what he had learned. In one of his last interviews, when asked what he would like people to remember about him, he replied, "That I tried to be honest. Not just in fighting, but in life. That I tried to be quick, not just with my fists, but with my mind. And that, in the end, true victory is not about defeating others, but about never stopping learning." In July 1973, Bruce Lee passed away. His death was a shock to the world, but his legacy was already immortal. Derek Vaughn would, years later, become a respected trainer, teaching a new generation of fighters that brute strength is only half the equation, the other half is knowing where, when, and why to hit. And so, the story of Bruce Lee's right punch continued to be told, not as a myth, but as a lesson. Because, in the end, mastery is not measured by the size of the blow, but by the wisdom of knowing when, and if, it is necessary to deliver it. The legacy of the invisible punch. Derek Vaughn never forgot Bruce Lee's words. They echoed in his mind like a mantra, especially on days when the gym smelled of sweat and despair, when students arrived with swollen fists and dreams bigger than reality. He had been one of the last to train with the master before his death, and that memory haunted him, not like a ghost, but like a responsibility. In the following years, Derek became a controversial figure in the martial arts world. While other trainers preached brute strength, he insisted on something more subtle: a punch is just a movement. What matters is what you do before and after it. This earned him enemies. Some called him weak, others a charlatan. But the results spoke for themselves. His most promising student, a young man named Elias Carter, was living proof of his philosophy. Elias had speed, but not discipline. "I was angry, but not in control." Derek first saw him in a street fight, where Elias knocked out 3 men in a blind rage. When he found him, the boy was smashing a bottle against an alley wall, his eyes red with hatred. "Do you want to be strong?" Derek asked, blocking the way. "Then learn not to fight." Elijah laughed, but Derek didn't move. For weeks, the trainer made him clean the gym, meditate for hours, and, most of all, observe. Elijah hated every second of it. Until the day Derek stood him in front of a mirror and said, "Now, show me your best punch." Elijah attacked with everything. Derek dodged it effortlessly. "You're not fighting me. You're fighting yourself." The lesson took time to be absorbed. Elijah almost gave up. He almost returned to the streets, where the violence was simple and immediate. But something kept him there, perhaps the fact that, for the first time, someone saw him not as an animal, but as a fighter. Years later, Elias Carter became world kickboxing champion. Not because it's the strongest, but because it's the most accurate. In his most famous fight, against an opponent twice his size, he won without throwing a single blow. Just movements, feints, and at the right moment, a step to the side. The opponent, unbalanced, fell alone. The crowd exploded. In the post-fight interview, Elias was asked what the secret was. "I didn't fight," he said. "I just let him fight himself." Derek watched the interview in a dingy bar, with a half-empty beer. Smiled. It wasn't his victory, nor Bruce Lee's. It was the victory of an idea, that true strength lies not in what you destroy, but in what you choose not to break. In the last years of his life, Derek Vaughan wrote a book. Not about techniques, but about principles. The Invisible Punch has become mandatory reading in gyms around the world. In it, he summarized everything he had learned. A fighter is not measured by what he takes down, but by what he gets up. A master is not one who never makes a mistake, but one who never repeats the same mistake. And Bruce Lee's greatest lesson was not how to hit, but how to think. Derek died in 1998, during a class. He was teaching a group of kids how to block a kick when his heart stopped. They say he fell smiling. Elias Carter, now a coach, found a copy of Derek's book among his belongings. On the first page, a dedication. For Elias, who learned to fight without punches. For everyone else, who still has a lot to unlearn. And so, the story continued. Not as a tale of invincible heroes, but as a reminder, the most difficult martial art is not to master the body, but the mind. And the most powerful punch is the one you choose not to throw. Derek's last lesson. The gym still smelled of sweat and old leather when Elijah Carter opened the cardboard box that Derek's parents had left for him. Among worn gloves, faded sashes, and an old photo of Derek in his first competition, his face swollen from being beaten so much, but his eyes shining with a determination that no punch could erase, was the book. The Way of the Warrior Without Violence by Derek Lang. The cover was marked by calloused fingers, the pages yellowed with age. At the dedication, Derek's words seemed to echo in the silence of the void he had left. Elijah closed his eyes. He remembered the day Derek had dragged him out of a street fight, when Elias, then an angry teenager, was trying to punch a boy who had called him a son of a bitch for being black. Derek hadn't stopped him with force, but with words. "You want to prove you're strong? Then don't let him decide who you are." At the time, Elias thought it was absurd. Now, I understood. The legacy in motion. Derek's gym, the last round, almost closed after his death. Students disappeared, bills piled up, and the city threatened to turn the space into a parking lot. It was Elijah who took the place, not out of ambition, but because he knew Derek would have done the same for him. He reopened the doors with a new banner. "Here, we learn to fall and get up. We don't teach punches. We teach choices." At first, few showed up. Real fighters laughed at the idea of a dojo that didn't prepare champions. But then came the others. The single mother who wanted to learn how to defend herself without becoming aggressive, the ex-convict trying to control his anger, the 12-year-old girl who was bullied and just wanted to stop shaking when someone looked down on her. Elijah welcomed them all, repeating Derek's lessons like a mantra. The real fight is against fear. The real enemy is within. Marcus's challenge. The first real test came with Marcus Varga, a former student of Derek's who had left the gym years before after a bad fight with another fighter. Marcus had come back different, bigger, tougher, with scars on his knuckles and a look that said he no longer believed in anything other than strength. When he entered the gym, it wasn't to train. It was to prove Derek wrong. Do you think you can win without hitting? Marcus spat on the mat, his fists clenched. I've seen what happens to those who don't fight back. They get beaten until there's nothing left. Elijah didn't move. I knew Marcus didn't want a fight, he wanted an answer. And the answer wasn't in the punches, but in the words Derek had taught him. Have you ever been beaten so much that you forgot what it's like not to be afraid? Elias asked, calmly. Or did you just learn to hit harder so no one would notice? Marcus hesitated. For a second, something flickered in his face, a memory, perhaps, of when he still believed there was another way. But then he gritted his teeth and moved forward. Elias didn't block. He didn't counterattack. He just moved to the side, letting Marcus pass, and when the punch missed its target, the momentum made the big man stumble. Before Marcus could recover, Elias grabbed his arm and, with a smooth movement, guided him to the ground, not with violence, but with control. You don't have to fall alone, Elias said, helping him to get up. Nobody needs it. Marcus stood there, panting, his fists still clenched but now shaking. Then, slowly, his fingers opened. The girl who learned to fly. Among the new students, there was a girl named Lena. Thin, with big eyes and always with her arms crossed over her chest, as if trying to make herself smaller. She had arrived at the gym after an episode at school. A group of boys had surrounded her in the bathroom, calling her weird and threatening to tear up her sketchbook. She didn't fight back. She just stood there paralyzed until a teacher found her curled up on the floor. In the first training session, Lena could barely look Elias in the eye. When he tried to teach her how to block a punch, she closed her eyes and flinched. Elijah stopped. You don't need to learn how to hit, he said. You need to learn not to be afraid. In the following months, Lena trained without rushing. He learned to breathe when panic came. She learned to position herself so that no one could corner her. And, little by little, she discovered something that no one expected: she was fast. Not like fighters who looked for knockouts, but like someone who knew exactly when to move to avoid getting hit. One day, in the schoolyard, the same boys who had threatened her tried to surround her again. This time, Lena didn't freeze. She stepped aside, put her hands up, not to hit, but to show that she was not easy prey, and said, in a voice that didn't shake, "You don't scare me anymore." They retreated. The last round. Years later, Elias still trained in the same gym, now with walls covered in photos of students who had passed by. Some became professional wrestlers. Others, teachers. Many simply went on with their lives, more confident, less scared. Marcus, now one of the instructors, taught children how to fall without hurting themselves. Lena, as an adult, taught self-defense classes for women. One night, after class, Elias found a letter under the door. There was no sender, but he recognized the handwriting immediately. Elijah. If you're reading this, it's because I once was. Don't cry for me, I left doing what I loved, surrounded by those I loved. But I have one last lesson for you: don't let them turn this into a temple. A dojo is not a sacred place. It's a place where people learn to pick themselves up. Tear down the walls if you need to. Burn the rules. Just don't let fear win. And remember, the most powerful punch is the one you choose not to throw. But sometimes, just sometimes, you need to throw a punch. Not to hurt. To wake up. Derek *. Elias folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Outside, the sound of laughter and footsteps on the mat echoed. He smiled. The fight continued. And, as always, the real fight was not against others. It was against fear.